Hi, this is the online module about estates and trusts. I'm Professor Donna Byrne. This is the second half, so if you didn't already watch the first half, I really suggest you go back and do that now. We're about to talk about Perkins versus Iglehart in Anderson and Bloom 4th edition around page 554. This is a pretty famous scenario. Lucy James Dunn, left a will, and it left property to William for life, son William, and then to William's widow for life, and then to son's descendants and next of kin. Now she did this kind of on the occasion of William marrying his first wife. Oh, clicking me does nothing. Okay, as it turns out, William actually married twice and outlived both of his wives. So when he died, there was no widow. But our question is that interest to his descendants, this one, to William's descendants and next of kin, is that interest valid? All right, we have to play the imagination game. Alrighty, let's see. Let's imagine that William was 22 when he got married and his wife was 21. And let's imagine that Lucy died the day after William's first wedding. And then imagine that William and wife 1 stayed married for 20 years, and then she died at age 41. At this point, he's 42. 2 years later, when he's 44, he marries again. Second wife is a mature young woman who is 21 at the time of the wedding. Now, can you imagine this? It's not too hard. It actually happens. My brother-in-law's older brother married a couple years ago, and last year around Thanksgiving, we all celebrated his wife's 21st birthday. He's 65. Yeah, right. This happens, right? Sometimes people marry with big age differences. So we can imagine this. It's not even that big of a stretch. So we could have a young bride now who was not born when Lucy died or when Lucy executed this trust. Right? This was an inter vivos trust even. So Lucy is out of the picture. We're now married to somebody who wasn't born at the time. You know what happens next. William's going to die. If William dies now, and now we have to wait until his widow dies, right? Because that's the second interest, to widow for life. She's only 21. We could be waiting a long time. Certainly, we could be waiting more than 21 years after William's death. That's too long, right? We need to know for sure that by the time William dies, when William dies, we'll have his widow, but she needed to be a life and being. Otherwise, that interest for the grandchildren, right, for William's descendants, that needs to vest at the end of a life and being. And we don't have that because we don't know that this young widow was a life and being. In fact, we can imagine a scenario where she wasn't. So we could have ended up waiting more than 21 years after the deaths of all lives in being. In other words, of Lucy and William. Now, we're just imagining this, but if we can imagine it, then the interest is invalid. Make sense? If we can imagine having to wait for somebody who was not born when the interest was created, and waiting more than 21 years, then the interest is invalid. Which one? Not the one to the widow, the one after that. So it's all about imagination. That's, as Albert Einstein says, that's more important than what we actually know, because it's not about what's actually going to happen. It's what we can imagine might happen. We have to have the certainty at the time the interest is created. Okay, here we go. Pointing out that it's the interest after the widow that's too remote here. The remainder to the descendants. Now, why is the remainder to the widow valid, since she might not even be born yet? Right, that one vests when William dies, and William is a life and being, And here is one of our rules. If the interest will definitely vest or fail at the end of a life and being, it is valid. Okay, can you think of ways to draft Lucy's will to benefit William's widow and then later William's descendants without blowing it with the common law rule? Here's a couple of possibilities. To William's widow, if she is someone who was alive at my death. Okay, some possible widows would be excluded, like the one that we imagined, but the remainder to the grandchildren would be okay. To William's widow, if she is someone who is alive at my death, and if she is not alive at my death, then to William's widow for 21 years. So some possible widows would only get 21 years of income, but the remainder to the grandchildren would be okay. Okay, here's another scenario that's kind of easy to trip on. The notion of fertility. All right, the common law assumes that any person, no matter how old, can always have a child. Now, that's not such a huge stretch for men. Oh gosh, why did I do that? Not a stretch for men, but come on. Women in their 80s, you know, it hasn't happened yet, but with modern science, maybe someday it will. I think we've had women give birth in their 60s, and of course people could adopt at any age. So assume that any person, no matter how old, no matter how medically impossible it may seem, could still have children. So in addition to those unborn widows, we also have fertile octogenarians. And then finally, some events that we think won't take very long could. And so, for example, the probate of an estate shouldn't take more than a few months, but it could go on for more than 21 years. A song should not last more than 3 to 5 minutes, but it could go on forever. All right, my link didn't work, but if you don't remember Lamb Chop and Sherry Lewis, the song went like this. This is a song that has no end. It just goes on and on, my friend. Some people started singing it not knowing what it was, and they'll continue singing it forever just because this is a song that has no end. Watch the video, you'll get the idea. Okay, here's another little kicker. A vested remainder subject to open is not vested for purposes of the rule against perpetuities. What's a vested remainder subject to open? That's where we have a class gift and somebody already exists enough to make this a vested remainder for that person. Okay, now we're not talking about the situation where we're going to close by convenience. All right, so we're still talking about a future interest that's going to take possession in the future. And here's an example. To Peter for life, then to Peter's children for their joint lives, and then the remainder to Peter's grandchildren. So, and here's our family tree. John created this in his will. He's deceased. Peter is the son, married to Karen, and they have 2 children, and they have 1 grandchild. Okay, so Peter's interest, to Peter for life, that's vested. All right, and it's also a present interest, so we don't need to worry about the rule against perpetuities. To Peter's children for their joint lives, remainder to Peter's grandchildren. Okay, well, this interest is vested for these 2, but it's subject to open. There could be more children, which means that the proportionate gift will get smaller. But nothing else has to happen. These ones are born, they're identifiable, and so although their remainder is only a life estate for joint lives, which means they do kind of have to survive, that's not considered a condition precedent. So for them, this is vested, but it's subject to open. And then there's a remainder to the grandchildren that's also vested and subject to open. Vested because we have 1 person who's already become a grandchild. Certainly there could be more. Now, that children's interest is valid, but the grandchildren's is void. Why? Well, let's think about when we will know who all of the children are. We will know that at the end of Peter's life. Peter is the validating life for his children, right? And Peter's a life and being. So we will know at the end of a life and being who all of the children are. So their interest is valid. But who are the validating lives for the grandchildren? Right? It's that, go back to the picture, it's the children's class, and some of them might not be born yet. Right? So we can't tie that grandchildren's class to any lives in being at the creation of the interest. Some of those grandchildren may not be born yet, and they may not, some of the children may not be born yet. So that if that class isn't closed, then we can't close this. We don't know when this will happen. And that interest for the grandchildren is therefore invalid. Yeah. Okay, here's another example. Doug's will says, to K for life, principal to my children if they attain the age of 25 years. And Kay, the wife, and Monica, a child, age 3, are the only survivors. Okay, what have we got? Kay's interest is valid. It's a present interest, and it's vested. The gift to my children is valid because this is Doug's will. Doug is the validating life for his children, and Doug is dead. He's a testator. This is one of those situations where it's really important to notice whether we're talking about a testamentary trust or an inter vivos trust. So the class of Doug's children is closed. Yes? Now, it's still contingent, right? There's still a contingency. These individuals have to reach age 25. But all of the children in this class are lives in being, right? Because this is Doug's will, and it says, to my children, there aren't going to be any more. In this case, it's only one child, and in either that child will live to be 25 or she won't. But either event, living to 25, dying before 25, is going to happen in her lifetime. So we will know for sure that this interest will either vest or fail during her lifetime. And she's a life in being. So I should have plugged in one of those blue rules, right? An interest that will vest in a life in being or will vest at the end of a life in being. Either one of those rules gets us there. Okay, in this case, it's the vest in a life in being, right? Because Monica is a life in being. Okay, so let's wrap this up. The common law rule again. A contingent future interest must be certain to vest or fail within 21 years of the end of a life in being at creation of the interest. The short version is lives in being plus 21 years. If you can remember the context, if the context makes sense to you, then lives in being plus 21 years should be enough to bring it back for you. Focus on the lives, not the 21 years. Put it in red here. Focus on the lives, not the 21 years. That's a grace period. And we saw that we can't make assumptions about the order of death, about fertility, or about the length of an event, right? And if you can remember the unborn widow, the fertile octogenarian, or the song that has no end, that will help you remember not to make those assumptions. And then also, really important to distinguish between testamentary trusts and inter vivos trusts. The testator is a life in being that has ended. And that means that if the testator is a feeder to a class, that class is closed. An inter vivos grantor, however, is a life in being that has not ended. So that can make a big difference sometimes. Yeah, that's just a sloth. Thank you for watching.